Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's April 2nd, 2023. I think at this point we all just have to embrace the fact that it's going to be a dumpster fire till the end of May. There's no getting around that, and this episode is certainly not going to be any deviation from that. There's been a lot that's gone on in the last, let's say 4 whole days of Alberta politics. We've got a lot to talk about, so we're going to get right into it. And to kick it off, the national story. Here we go.
The federal carbon tax just went up. Alberta moms and dads know what this means. Utilities, groceries, fuel, and everything else just became more expensive. When the Alberta NDP brought in the carbon tax, they weren't thinking about what your family can afford. And that's why our UCP government is standing up to inflation by cutting your taxes, creating high-paying jobs, and fighting to end Ottawa's carbon tax. Let's continue to build more prosperity and opportunities for all Albertans. That's my commitment to your family.
So there's obviously the top story, or at least the story that we're going with off the top tonight. Got to talk about the carbon tax. There's a lot going on. It went up a little bit. People are excited because something called the tax went up. Danielle Smith produced that lovely little video with nice piano music in the background to say words that were scripted, so they didn't turn into a raging dumpster fire. But it's worth talking about a few things in regards to the carbon tax, because there's some nuance here. First of all, let's be clear. First carbon tax was not brought in by the NDP. Got to be clear about that one. The first carbon tax was actually brought in 2007. Now, it was confined largely to heavy emitters or big industrial emitters of carbon. But fact remains, we started down this road well before the NDP showed up into the picture. Now, it's true that it's absolutely true that the NDP did bring in, under Rachel Notley, the Climate Leadership Plan. And with the Climate Leadership Plan, one of the things that we saw with the Climate Leadership Plan was the expansion to more consumer-based carbon taxes. Now, why did this happen? It happened because the federal government said, hey, you know what? The planet's on fire. We should do something about that. We keep having these extreme weather events that cost us billions of dollars. Calgary's had a couple. That's not cheap. Maybe we could be a little bit proactive and not have everything burn, perhaps. And you can go back and forth on whether or not you were in love with the NDP carbon tax. The Climate Leadership Plan. There were for sure some things that maybe needed to be adjusted. But here's the big thing that we have to remember about the NDP's carbon tax. If Alberta hadn't brought something in, then the federal government very clearly said, well, we'll bring in our own thing then. The check was in the mail either way. One way or the other, Alberta was going to have to make some major changes to the carbon reduction plan. Now, Alberta did. It went to the federal court, the Supreme Court, and they said, hey, can they do this? And the Supreme Court said, actually, yes, they can. They're allowed to. Sucks to be you guys. Figure it out. Jason Kenney got elected, and he said, you know what? I'm going to get rid of this carbon tax because I campaigned on it, even though having a made in Alberta solution did give Alberta control over all of the money and where it went. We gave that up because blue trucks or something. I'm not sure. Jason Kenney got rid of the carbon tax, the Climate Leadership Plan that Rachel Notley had introduced, and the feds immediately said, oh, we warned you. Now we're bringing in the federal one. And so there is now a federal carbon tax, and it does gradually increase over the next few years. Now, there's some things that we have to bear in mind when we're talking about these gradual increases. So the price of carbon has increased to $65 a ton. And that sounds very abstract, quite frankly. $65 for a ton of carbon. For what does a ton of carbon look like? What is that? How do you fit that in a box? It's a very abstract number. But here's the thing that you also have to realize. With the carbon tax increases, the carbon tax rebate has also increased. And this is where things start to get a little bit complicated, because depending on how you choose to look at it, some people are going to end up not getting back all of the money that they pay via carbon tax. Absolutely true. But it's overwhelmingly the more wealthy people. Now, for Alberta, it gets a little complicated, because here's a hard truth. Brace yourselves. We're actually doing okay. We're doing better than the vast majority of the country. If you take a look at Alberta, where we stand, we're making more money than the average Canadian. Our quality of life is better than the average Canadian. We always celebrate. We're like, hey, you know what, Alberta, number one, and it's true in a lot of ways. But that also means that we've got more money and more disposable income. More disposable income means we're buying more sea-doos or ski-doos or boats that make carbon. So it costs more to use those things, because the whole point of the carbon tax is to try to change people's behavior. Now, there are some places where obviously you don't get much of a choice. We're talking about rural Alberta. That's one of the reasons why there is a bump for rural Albertans. But here's a big thing to take away. There's an economist, he's been on the show a couple times, super smart guy, way smarter than me, and he's actually taken a look at this stuff. That's the wrong graph. Whoops. He's actually taken a look at this stuff. And what Dr. Toom, I'll find the graphic and I'll throw it up in post, as they say. But what Dr. Trevor Toom has taken a look at is he's spaced out all of the increases over all of the different cost areas. And it turns out, for the overwhelming majority of people, the overwhelming majority of Canadians, you get more than you're paying out. I think I might have found me the graph right here. Yeah, there we go. So here's the graph right here. From Dr. Trevor Toom, carbon taxes rose to $65 a ton today. Here's how that affects the average household based on Alberta. Thanks to extensive research by others, we know the effect of food prices. I use carbontax.costs.ca and find roughly $1 a month more for food. The higher rebate compensates. So it goes through. Here's what the previous costs were. Here's what the increase to the costs are. Go to the far right side of the graph. We've got the new costs, and then we've got the new rebates. And you can see the new rebates graphy thing is bigger than the new costs. So the average household in Alberta is still, according to an economist who's way smarter than me, it appears to be coming out ahead. So that's not an entirely bad thing. But a lot of people are like, well, what do the numbers actually look like? Let's take a look at what those numbers actually look like. So the Alberta program, because it is specific to provinces, the Alberta program provides an annual credit of $772 for an individual, $386 for a spouse or common law partner, $193 per child under 19, and $386 for the first child in a single parent family. We talked about rural Alberta a second ago. This is where they fit in. The CAIP includes a rural supplement of 10% of the base amount for residents of rural and small communities. Here's what it basically works out to for a family of four. You're going to get quarterly payments. They're going to be about $386 for a family of four. 386 times 4, there's your total for the year. Now, like I said, for people who travel a lot, for people who have the toys and the toy haulers and all of the things, absolutely. You're using more gas, you're going to pay more. And I get that that sucks. But here's the other piece of the problem. We do have a carbon emissions problem. Alberta is the biggest carbon emitter in the country. We always like to talk in Alberta how we're leaders. We're in charge. We're going to show Confederation. We're going to, as Danielle Smith likes to say, we're going to educate the rest of Canada how Confederation's supposed to work. This is how we do it. It's one of the ways. We have behaviors that need to be changed, and it sucks, but it's the reality. For the people who are better off, it's going to hurt a little bit more, but you're better off so you can absorb it a little bit more is the idea. But for the average Alberta household and people who are making below the average Alberta household income, you're still coming out ahead. So there's that. But speaking of, we're gonna jump around a little bit because that graphic was in the wrong place, and we're gonna go right to the new polling numbers. So there's a new poll out from Innovative Research, and it is it's a little bit interesting. So we're seeing the NDP 40%, UCP 39%. The Alberta Liberal Party, in a fascinating twist, is apparently at 7%. The Green Party of Alberta is at 6%. The Alberta Party is taking a hit there. They're down to 5%, and the Wild Rose Independence Party is at 4%. So here's the thing, as we always say with polls, it's a pretty small sample size. We're talking about 404 people online. We're going to see more and more and more of these polls as we ramp up to the election. That much is pretty inevitable. But one of the things that we can look for in the polls is A, who's doing the polling, how are they doing it? And the other piece is how big is the sample size? It's not a huge sample size. We've already pretty much clearly established the one pattern that we've seen across the province is it's going to be battleground Alberta is going to be battleground Calgary. Let's talk about jobs for a sec. Alberta's making some jobs. Some folks are getting some new jobs. Jason Kenney, very exciting. He's been appointed to the board of directors for ATCO. He's got a pretty extensive political reference. I think he's a good example, perhaps, of how in Alberta you don't necessarily need a post-secondary education to make millions of dollars a year. You just have to be extraordinarily lucky. The bad news about jobs, though, is The Last of Us, which was a fantastic show. And it has given me some wonderful metaphors and analogies that I've been using over the last couple of weeks. I can be topical too. And there was some news that broke about The Last of Us that's not great for Alberta. A lot of people who play the games, I'll be honest, I haven't played the games. I don't know anything about the games except there's, I assume, zombies and people running away from them. The Last of Us announced that they're going to be filming the second season in Vancouver. Now, this is, as many people touted, you know what? It was a huge infusion of cash into the Alberta economy. It was the biggest production in the history of Alberta, hands down. Well, it appears there's a little bit of let's go with debate as to whether or not they're actually going all the way to Vancouver, or maybe they're still going to do some stuff in Calgary. We don't really know. But what we did see was this tweet from a high-level staffer in the UCP government to Minister Brian Jean. He responded, they're doing over $100 million of filming in Alberta for season 2. I've seen the application. Now, that tweet you can only see as a screenshot because shortly after it was deleted and this tweet came up. I may have been conflating some already done filming with next season's application. When these things get paid out is complicated. I will check on Monday and get back to you. They have applied for more than the amount I mentioned, but I might be wrong about how much of it was in season 2. So that's cool. We're just talking now about multi-million-dollar investments in the province of Alberta, but we don't know exactly what's going on and when. And yeah, we'll just see what happens. We'll be watching on Monday to see whether or not there's an announcement for a retraction or a resounding silence. Probably going to be a little bit more on the resounding silence side of things. Moving on from there, we got to talk a little bit more about the freshly removed leader of the Independence Party and the star of the recent Danielle Smith direct-to-video production entitled Maybe I Will Interfere with the Administration of Justice. Maybe I won't. Who knows? Artur Pawlowski. So Artur Pawlowski was removed by the board of directors the day before the announcement and the release of the video happened. Now, there's some people who have said maybe he was kicked out and he released the video as retribution, which doesn't actually fit all that great because that's a really fast turnaround for all of the news reporters who did some pretty in-depth reporting on the situation. But here's the Coles notes, and here's a little bit about why we need to talk about who Artur is, because it gets complicated real quick. But to start with, on March 28th, 2023, after the media release was released by the board of directors for the Independence Party of Alberta, after serious consideration and deliberation among the provincial board members, it has been decided to part ways with the leader of the Independence Party of Alberta, Artur Pawlowski. The Independence Party has a party platform and policies that reflect the hope of Albertans as an independent nation. Art Pawlowski has not reflected this vision in a way that properly aligns with the party, and our platforms need to convey and communicate to Albertans. The Independence Party of Alberta believes in the positive and hopeful future of Alberta, and is confident that the future leader of this party will communicate hope, unity, and preservation of a strong and patriotic voice for all Albertans. Now, this is where we have to talk a little bit about who Art is, because Art's got some problems. a little bit of a, let's go with, polarizing figure in the landscape of Alberta politics. Uh, Art currently is awaiting a verdict on a couple of charges that he got coming out of the Coots blockade. Because during the Coots blockade, he went down when everybody was thinking of leaving, and he stood up and he said, "This could be our Alamo. Let's not leave. Let's, I guess, die at a minor border crossing or something." But he was charged with mischief, and it wasn't under the. He was also charged under the Infrastructure Act, but it wasn't under the health regulations or the health measures that he was charged under. He was charged under these two other things, and they carry a pretty serious penalty. Now, one might think, well, Art, he's new to the criminal system. There's no way that he could have known about the severity of breaking rules. But, Art wasn't new. All throughout the pandemic, he did go out of his way to publicly and deliberately defy and flaunt public health restrictions. And he did it in some pretty gross ways, quite frankly. He was a leader of several of the freedom marches. He also organized the Tiki Torch marches. And we talked a little bit about this episode, but we're going to go just a little bit more in depth into it this week because we had some questions and we wanted to address those. So the Art organized the Tiki Torch marches, and he said, "You know what? The Tiki Torch marches, they're about light." Just because a lot of people associate tiki torches with overt racism doesn't necessarily mean it has anything to do with racism. And it's important to realize he didn't just organize one of these marches, he made sure that he ran parallel marches. Now, here's where his argument about it's just about light kind of turns into a whole lot of bullshit. This is the poster. The top image is the poster for the Walk for Freedom. This was the poster advertising the march at the Edmonton legislature, and it was called the Jericho Torch March. Now it looks lovely. There's look, there's somebody breaking free of chains there, and there's a dove, and it's Walk for Freedom, and you can see a bunch of folks walking for freedom with tiki torches. Except when we go to where that image came from, that image is of the Freedom Rally in Charlottesville in 2017 that saw people seriously injured and killed. Now, you can say, well, but was it really racist? Yeah, it kind of was. This is August 12th in 2017. This is not an abstract picture. We didn't have to go digging through the depths of the internet in order to find this. This is straight off of the Wikipedia page for that event because it was so overtly racist. And yes, if you look in that picture, there sure is a swastika. There sure are Confederate flags. There sure are Mjolnir. I think I'm saying that right. It's been a while since I watched the Marvel movies. Pictures. There's a whole lot of Norse and racist bullshit that's going on in this picture. And that is the image, that is the event that was chosen to represent the Walk for Freedom. This isn't even a subtle dog whistle. This is overt, hey, it's kind of cool to be racist, right, kids? Except, let's be clear, it's absolutely not. Now, Art and his tiki torches, they enjoyed a little bit of a meteoric rise to fame. Art went and did speaking tours across the United States with the bread and butter of the far alt-right. Reportedly made himself a good amount of money on that tour. That allowed him to catapult into the leadership race for the Independence Party of Alberta, which, let's be honest, at best in the next provincial election are going to be a rounding error. But that's not the concern because they're emboldening a lot of attitudes and a lot of problems. Now, you might be looking at this whole situation and going, yeah, but he got kicked out. So it's cool, right? We don't have to worry about this anymore because Art's gone. Well, as of right now, yes. But in a stunning display of Boy, we didn't think about what the next 10 minutes of this thing was going to look like. The board made the decision to remove Art as leader less than a week before their AGM. Guess what happened at the AGM? The entire board of directors that voted to remove Art Pawlowski as leader of the Independence Party of Alberta were turfed, and they were replaced by people who Art was quite enthusiastic about. One of the things that we need to be mindful of and cognizant of when we're talking about these sorts of people is they've always existed. There have always been these little pockets of hatred and intolerance and bigotry and racism, but they stayed in their little pockets by and large. I've said it before on the show. We'll say it again. COVID was a 3-year boot camp for these people. They learned how to organize. They learned how to get involved in organizations. And they're now getting closer and closer to the mainstream. Art is just a perfect example of all of this because the reality is he was able to get mainstream enough that he was able to have a phone conversation with the Premier of Alberta at the end of January. And we're going to talk about that phone conversation in just a little bit. But before we move to that, there's one other little piece that we wanted to quickly kind of highlight and address. And that has to do with a bunch of the candidates that we've seen over the last couple of weeks running for the UCP. Let's start in Livingston-McLeod, which for the record, it's got an A in it. Don't spell it without the A. They don't like that one bit. They'll tell you. It's bad news bears. Chelsea Petrovich, I'm not sure. She got herself the UCP nomination for Livingston-McLeod. That was supposed to be Danielle Smith's riding. It's a hotly contested riding. There was a bunch of people who ran for it, but Chelsea came out on top. Now, Chelsea is kind of sort of new to politics. She was just recently elected the mayor of Claresholm. But she decided that she wanted to move up in the world. And there's a couple of things that we want to just quickly touch on with the whole Chelsea thing. Because allegedly, one of the key organizers for her campaign was also one of the Coots blockade guys. And he's got some charges that he's navigating his way through. But there's also this. So Chelsea, as the mayor of Livingston-McLeod, she actually tweeted out from her Chelsea Petrovic, mayor of Claresholm page. So this is presumably her official mayoral page for the town of Claresholm. She tweeted out, fundraising event happening tonight at the Claresholm Arena. Beef on the bun will be served. And it was ostensibly a fundraiser for a family who was dealing with some difficult medical situations. But here's where it gets really complicated, because if you look at the bottom of that little poster, oh, we know that logo, don't we? Alberta Prosperity Project. So if you came to the fundraiser to listen to the solutions for a new Alberta that was being presented by the separatist group, the Alberta Prosperity Project. And I'm sorry, but if you list in your 10 goals, your 10 defining values in multiple places that you want Alberta to be a nation, you don't get to be like, whoa, we're not separatists. Now, they've walked back the language that they use online about separatism a little bit because, unsurprisingly, the vast majority of Albertans don't want to leave Canada. They weren't getting the traction that they wanted. So they've walked that rhetoric back a little bit, but it's still on their webpage. It's still very clear. They want the nation of Alberta to be a thing. It's hard to imagine something more greasy than hosting a fundraiser for a sick kid and using that as cover to talk about your political aspirations, to sow discontent. It's really hard to imagine something more greasy than that, but I suppose sharing that event from your official mayoral Facebook page might be in that realm. Now, you could look at this as a one-off. You could say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe this was just maybe she didn't know. Maybe Chelsea didn't know about all these things. We can ignore that one of her key campaign guys was involved with the Coots blockade. He was one of the alleged organizers of the Coots blockade. He is facing charges for the Coots blockade. We could ignore all of that. Maybe this event, this happened in September of 2022. This might have been before she realized what was going on. But here's the problem with that. Chelsea's social media is incredibly well curated. It's pretty locked down. It's what you would expect from somebody who's looking to run to be the MLA. Her husband, though, it's a little bit different there. Because when you go onto her husband's Facebook page, Cody Petrovich, and again, to be clear, these are publicly available posts. These are not private posts. We didn't create like a secret account or anything and get into his Facebook through some sort of surreptitious means. You can go to his Facebook page right now. I imagine it'll probably be changing in the next 15, 20 minutes. But if you go right now, you can see all of these posts are there. He's sharing stuff from Jamie Soleil, the COVID freedom queen, I guess. He's sharing posts where he's talking about the convoy. He's sharing pictures where he's actually in the convoy. And from the pictures, it sure looks a lot like he's in the convoy at Coots. He's sharing pictures where certain UCP MLAs who have some wild theories about COVID, Shane Getson, is talking about how we need to get back to normal. But I think perhaps the most offensive one of all of them is he's sharing videos of Vladimir Putin saying Russia is not behaving aggressively. It's all NATO's fault. Russia had no choice but to defend itself against the Ukrainian threat. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but if you look at the center of your screen, you'll see it literally says, therefore saying, Vladimir Putin saying, therefore saying Russia is behaving aggressively is at odds with common sense. This is from March of last year, more than a month after the invasion of Ukraine. So it's really hard to look at the publicly available social media posts of Chelsea's husband and just dismiss her involvement with one of the Coots organizers and just dismiss her using her official municipal government account to elevate an event being hosted by the Alberta Prosperity Project. It just strains a little bit of credulity. But moving on to our other big UCP, well, we got a couple of UCP candidates we're going to talk about tonight. We got to talk about Miss Tanner. So you might remember earlier in the week, Tori Tanner, she the video kind of went a little bit, I think the kids call it viral, where she said some incredibly transphobic, homophobic things, and then also claimed that kids were being shown pornography in schools and that at kindergarten levels. Now, there's a couple of pieces that appear to require a little bit of clarification because judging from the bio that exists on Ms. Tanner's nomination website, she actually homeschooled her kids. So it begs a bunch of questions as to how would she even know what's going on inside of a public school if she homeschooled her kids. But above and beyond that, the Alberta Teachers Association was very clear. Everything that she said was untrue. Well, didn't take very long for that to resolve itself. The United Conservative Party on March 30th, just a couple days, released a statement of a statement. And the statement from Tori Tanner read, "My decision to run for office was rooted in a desire to make sure a UCP government was elected to keep Alberta on the right track forward. During the nomination process, I made a video that, at its core, spoke to my commitment to protecting children. However, it's clear that my choice of words have distracted not only from the issue I was trying to discuss, but are being used by my political opponents to hurt our chances of winning across the province. Accordingly, I have resigned as the candidate for Lethbridge West. I want to thank my supporters for encouraging for their encouragement during the process. Your blessing to me. I hope you will all continue to be remained in the political process. Now, a couple of things to highlight there. Nowhere did she say, I lied. Nowhere did she say, I spread falsehoods. And nowhere did she say, I'm sorry. She said that her choice of words was being weaponized against her, which is spectacularly on brand for UCP comms, because when you boil that whole statement down, the essence of it is, I spoke imprecisely. People got angry. But it's worth noting, and this was one of the things that came up during the conversation as well, as we take a look at how I'm going to say the fringe is cordycepting its way through the UCP party. Tori's got a little bit of a history. The beginning of the pandemic, she actually sued CMOH and I'll read it. Her Majesty the Queen in Right of the Province of Alberta and the Chief Medical Officer of Health sued them because health restrictions. And I just want to read this one little paragraph here because it really just does speak to the entitlement. The applicant, Ms. Tanner, is a business owner in Calgary, Alberta, who lives with her eldest daughter. Christmas time and family time are extremely important to her, and the CMOH orders are prohibiting her from gathering together with her family. Well, that's true. All Albertans experience that because there was a pandemic. There was a natural disaster on a global scale. Everybody missed out on all kinds of different events during the pandemic because it was a natural disaster. It's hard for me to wrap my head around the amount of entitlement that it takes to say, well, yes, my house was on fire, but I really, really, really wanted to make dinner in there tonight. Because that's the equivalent metaphor that we're talking about here. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's truly stunning that the UCP, as a party, because let's remember, that video, that wasn't new. That happened before the nomination vote. That happened before she was the official candidate. This court case wasn't new. It happened before the nomination vote. Somehow, the UCP managed to just gloss over all of this in their desire to find a candidate, and apparently they'll just take anyone because they certainly aren't doing any kind of, quality control in regards to the people that they're letting into their private club, because that's what political parties are at their core. But she wasn't the only candidate that we saw back away this week. There was another candidate who decided to take a step back from the whole thing, and that person was the candidate for Edmonton South, Tunde Obasan. Now, Tunde resigned because of personal reasons. He went through the whole nomination, and there's been multiple people who have said, you know what, this is super weird because like just a day ago, he came to my door knocking, and then less than 24 hours later, here he is resigning for personal reasons. It's super weird. But this isn't Tunde's first UCP race that's gone sideways on him. In 2019, he ran for the UCP as well, but he got in some trouble for some social media posts that went back to 2017. And it's worth noting that when he defended these social media posts, his response was to say, it's just a joke, and also the NDP suck. What was the post? It was a post of somebody apparently holding up a red poster of some kind. It says, "Dear wife, if you want to bring out the best in your husband, give him these two things, respect and sex." And then any story. I don't know what that is. But that's the post that this UCP candidate shared in 2017. It's fascinating. I wish Mr. Obasan all the best, but it's certainly worth wondering, given the bozo eruptions that we've seen over the last week, was maybe something else found? Was maybe a phone call made to say, hey, we found these other posts. They're not great looking. We're having a bit of a week. We don't know. He hasn't issued any statements above and beyond that. It's also worth noting he wasn't the only candidate who had problems in 2017. It was widely reported on that he had these problems, but one of the other candidates, we talked about him a little bit earlier, Mr. Grant Hunter. Mr. Grant Hunter got in hot water in 2017 because of a cryptic letter to the editor, and I'm reading this right from the Global News story. The article detailed a cryptic letter to the editor in which Hunter submitted to the Cardston Temple City Star in 2010, in which he praised the town of Cardston for bringing up some of the highest standard individuals imaginable. How then can a small town of 3,500 people churn out such a high number of individuals of substance? The letter read in part, perhaps they come from superior stock. But that thought reeks of Aryan undertones. Didn't stop him from writing it, though. Grant Hunter was one of the UCP MLAs who made a show of attending the Coots convoy. Took the grandkids, as you do for an illegal insurrection and border blockade. All perfectly normal in southern Alberta, apparently. Moving on from there, got a couple more stories before we get into the main event, which is, of course, the Danielle Smith show video debacle. But we got to start with this one. And this one lands a little bit close to home to me, full disclosure. Rajan Sani is currently the MLA for Calgary Northeast. She's my MLA. Well, I ran against her in 2019. And there's some things that you got to understand about the constituency of Calgary Northeast. Politics in Calgary Northeast is super complicated. It is super aggressive. That's just the nature of the beast for how that constituency sits and the incredibly diverse demographics that exist in it. And it was already very, very clear this was going to be a very complicated nomination race because one of Danielle Smith's liaisons to the northeast side of Calgary was already backing a candidate despite the fact that Rajan Sani was the MLA. So it didn't come as a huge surprise to very many people, especially given the fact that Rajan Sani had come out so hard against Danielle Smith during the leadership race. She made it very, very clear during the leadership race that Danielle Smith was absolutely going to be the worst possible outcome for Alberta. It didn't come as a surprise to anyone when on February 17th, Rajan issued this statement. Dear friends, today I met with Premier Smith to inform her that I will not be seeking the nomination or re-election for Calgary Northeast. I will continue to serve as the MLA for Calgary Northeast until the end of this mandate, serving as the MLA for this constituency and as a minister of several portfolios under both the Honourable Jason Kenney and Honourable Premier Smith has been a tremendous honour and a great privilege. I thank both of these great leaders for the opportunities they have afforded to me to serve in their cabinets. I continue to be a strong supporter of Premier Smith and her leadership, and I look forward to the United Conservative Party forming government again after May of this year. I would like to thank my colleagues, my team, my supporters, and most of all, my family for their unconditional and unwavering support over the past many years. Finally, I would like to say a heartfelt thank you to my constituency, Calgary Northeast, for placing their trust and faith in me as their MLA. Now, reading that, it certainly sounds like a bit of a farewell. It certainly sounds like a so long and thanks for all the fish. It certainly sounds like I'm done with public life. But as is so often the case with UCP, the devil's in the details. Because when we go back and we read that first paragraph, today I met with Premier Smith to inform her that I would not be seeking nomination or re-election for Calgary Northeast. I will continue to serve as the MLA for Calgary Northeast. She didn't say she was done with politics. And we saw how that played out this week when shortly after Sonia Savage had announced her intention to leave politics, the UCP announced that Rajan Sani was being appointed the new candidate in Calgary Northwest. So maybe we're just working our way to all four of the quadrants. Who knows? But the press release from the United Conservatives read in part, United Conservative Party leader, the Honourable Danielle Smith, has named Rajan Sani as the UCP candidate in Calgary Northwest in the upcoming election. Now, you might be wondering, how does that work? According to the UCP bylaws, the leader gets 4 get out of jail free cards. She gets to appoint 4 people wherever she wants to. She gets to just say, this I'm moving this piece here, and that's the end of the story. She's already said she's going to be using one of those on Travis Taves. But here's where it gets a little complicated. Because there's only supposed to be, as per the bylaws, 4 appointments. But if we go through the list, we need to replace Travis Taves. We need to replace Sonia Savage. We have the Edmonton South candidate that needs to be replaced. And we have the Lethbridge West candidate that needs to be replaced. Well, that's 4 right there. But somehow, earlier on, both Danielle Smith and Brian Jean were appointed as candidates for their respective constituencies. They didn't have any kind of nomination race. And the justification that the party provided at the time was, well, it's because they just finished a by-election, so, why bother? There's not actually any written mechanism anywhere in the UCP bylaws or constitution that say if somebody just recently ran in a by-election, they don't have to have a nomination in that constituency. Doesn't say that anywhere. What it does say is that the provincial board, as it deems necessary, can make up whatever rules they want. It's fascinating that for the party that prides itself on being the rule of law party and being the party of standards and principles and all of the things, they include clauses that basically say, you know what, even if it's months before an election, as it was when Brian Jean and Danielle Smith were both appointed candidates, we're gonna pick the ones that we like. And that brings us all the way up to the continuing saga of Danielle Smith and Artur Pawlowski's video chat. If you listened to the last episode that we did on Wednesday, we played the whole thing in full. Don't worry, we're not going to do that again. Thank you to everybody who sat through it, but it was a very important piece that needed to be discussed and talked about. Everybody was waiting for Saturday. Danielle Smith, she hasn't been available. She's not doing a whole lot of press conferences these days. Even if you remember a couple months ago, she was like, you know what? I want to do these things weekly because I believe in being accessible. That happened once. We had the one press conference for media accessibility once, and then we apparently stopped those, almost as if Danielle Smith off script isn't so great. But the radio show, everybody knows every Saturday, it's the radio show. So what did Danielle Smith have to say on her radio show?
Did he get your time?
Well, I talked to Albertans across the province, and I did during the leadership, and many people who had received charges and were going through a court process. And I made it very clear during the campaign that I would do what I could to seek amnesty. It's happened in the past when laws change that you don't pursue the charges against an individual. I look at the cannabis amnesty, for instance, that Justin Trudeau brought in. When the cannabis legalization happened, he has a whole process that people can go through, and they can get pardoned for things that are no longer a crime. So that was my intention, was to see.
Sure, but that's more of a federal level, though, and in Alberta,
and that's what I discovered. Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I discovered. Is that a provincial premier doesn't have the power of amnesty. I mean, I'm new in the premier's job, but I did commit that I would look into seeing whether there was an opportunity to do that. And I had several conversations with Justice Department officials, especially as cases were getting resolved, to see if that was changing any of the evaluation they were doing on the two things there's only two things I can ask. Is it in the public interest? And is there a reasonable likelihood of conviction? And as you start seeing case law develop, you are able to sort of reassess and recalibrate. Does it pass those two tests? And every time I raised it, they said, yeah, we're just waiting on a couple of court cases to be resolved, and you got to wait. You got to be patient. And so that's what I did. That was the advice that I was given. I know people are still. I know people are still hung up on the language I used, and you and I talked about this back in January, because I kind of think of my Tyler Shandro as my top lawyer. I think of Mike Ellis as my top cop. So I was using imprecise language. Every communication that I had with my department was with my officials. It was appropriate.
Yeah, and it was through proper channels.
Through proper channels, yep. I can only talk to department officials. I did. I raised the issue. I kept a campaign promise. I was told there was nothing we can do. We had to wait for the court process to play out. I checked one last time. I was told the same thing, and I haven't raised it again.
So how did Mr. Pawlowski get get you on the phone?
I have a mutual friend who asked if I would do a three-way call. So my friend called me and then he called him. That was the only conversation I had with him.
Do you regret that decision now?
Well, look, you never expect that you're going to be surreptitiously recorded in any call that you have. I do lots of phone calls, and now I ask when I'm having a phone call with somebody, "Are you recording me?" but people should feel comfort that I say the same thing in a call that I'm being recorded on that I don't know about that I say to you on the show. It was exactly the same conversation. Is that I looked into it, found out I don't have the power of amnesty. There's a lot of confusion, I think, that people have about how our court system works versus the Americans. I used imprecise language in referring to my Justice Department officials. We're waiting for the court case to play out, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Now, there's so much that I love about that little closing rundown of all of the pre-planned talking points, because you could tell just in the way that she rattled off those last three things. I spoke it precisely. All of the things that she packs into the very end there. But my favorite part is she went back and she reused people think the Canada justice system is just like the American justice system. Like, sometimes people think that. When not 2 minutes prior, she said, yeah, I was one of those people who didn't know any better, despite the fact that I have over 2 decades in politics, despite the fact that I provided commentary throughout the SNC-Lavalin controversy that says that she does know a lot of these things. But there's a couple of other interesting points to just sort of tease out before we get into the really spicy stuff, because she talks about amnesty and how when the laws aren't in place anymore, sometimes we have to do amnesty. Here's the thing. As I said earlier, Artur wasn't charged for these situations under a CMOH order. The charges that Artur is facing are mischief and under the Critical Infrastructure Act that Jason Kenney introduced. Those laws are still on the books. They haven't gone anywhere. It has nothing to do with any sort of health measures that were put in place at the time. So even if you want to say, well, these court cases, we got to see how they play out, it doesn't change the fact that those laws are still on the books. So she's misrepresenting things already, which is either something that she's doing willfully or it's something that she's doing because she doesn't know any better, which is deeply horrifying because, as she said, she's getting all of her legal advice from the very, very best people. She talks to her Minister of Justice, Tyler Shandro, all the time. He's setting the record straight. As we heard from the phone call, she relies almost entirely, though, on Rob Anderson, her executive director of her office, to provide her legal advice. The same Rob Anderson who presumably, while Danielle Smith campaigned on amnesty that isn't a thing, never said to her, oh, by the way, that's not a thing. The discovery of amnesty not being an option is really quite remarkable. But I think one of the most important things that comes out of her little bit on the radio show is the fact, do you have any regrets? And her answer is, in effect, well, I regret that it was recorded. Whoa, nobody expected that. She doesn't regret having the conversation. She doesn't regret having the conversation with Artur Pawlowski. She doesn't regret the fact that mutual friend that she refers to is Dr. Dennis Modry, who was the head for a very long time of the Alberta Prosperity Project, that separatist group that we talked about earlier. It's all just a big ball of twine. It's all so messy, but it's the same names that keep popping up again and again and again and again. Well, to really get the full flavor of the week, though, we have to go to the press conference that Deputy Premier, who's got some experience in attempting to interfere in the administration of justice, Casey Badiou, he wanted to do a camping show, apparently.
That Premier in the clips that you guys are sharing talked about prosecution. But if you understand how our system works, and many of you in the media are very much aware of how our system is designed to work, but you are ignoring how the system is structured to work and focusing on Premier's reference to the word prosecutors and prosecution. The Premier cannot, let me be clear, the Premier or cabinet ministers have no mechanism to speak with prosecutors.
So let's unpack a couple of things there before we move on to the second Madhu clip, which is just, it's my favorite because you'll see in a sec. Madhu's criticism there is, media, you know how the system works. Just because Danielle Smith made, and he calls it a reference, but let's be clear, we have now 4 recordings where Danielle Smith has said that she spoke to prosecutors directly. That's literally just a matter of fact. So it's not a reference, it's references. But his thing is, you guys, anybody who knows how the system works would never say prosecutors. You guys should know that because that's how the system works. So apparently, Casey Madhu's argument is that the media should have a higher level of understanding of the powers that are available to the premier than the premier herself. It's a fresh hot take. Not as good as this one, though.
Question for me in all of this stuff that is being leaked right now is whether or not the Premier was appropriate in her conversation with the Justice Department and her senior justice officials, and the answer is no to any objective, reasonable person out there who have taken a closer look at the recorded video that is circulating.
So the question that Mr. Madhu has been asking himself since this all started is, did Danielle Smith act appropriately? And the answer is no. I haven't seen the statement coming out about him speaking imprecisely yet, but I assume that's going to be the cover because otherwise it was just a rare Freudian moment. But coming off of the heels of Mr. Madhu's press conference, there was another press conference that took place. This was a press conference where the leader of the opposition, Rachel Notley, came out, and she came out swinging. I've said it before. I'll keep saying it again. Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith are the polar opposites of each other. Danielle Smith, on a script, crushes it. Take the script away from Danielle Smith, that's when she gets herself into trouble. Rachel Notley with the script sounds like she's doing bad voiceover for some low-budget cartoon. But if you take her off the script, Rachel Notley off the cuff, that's something else.
Today, I asked the Deputy Premier whether it was appropriate for the Premier to be taking a call from someone awaiting trial. And he said that the Premier is free to speak with anyone she wishes to speak to. What do you make of that response? And what, if any, concerns do you have about leadership of this particular party and their judgment in particular?
Well, the comments by the former Attorney General, who failed upwards to Deputy Premier after being kicked out of his job because he claimed it was okay for him to call the Chief of Police about his own traffic ticket, who was then contradicted by a judge who did an independent review, quite frankly, are not the comments that are worth an ounce of anything when it comes to determining who has done anything appropriate or not appropriate in this province. He has no credibility on this matter. It shows the fact that he's the Deputy Premier, quite frankly, doesn't reflect well on the judgment of this Premier. The fact that he would say such a thing doesn't reflect well on his judgment. But most importantly here, the real issue is the leadership of this province. It's the Premier herself saying these things, not understanding how profoundly troubling they are, what the consequences of these things are, what their implications are for a parliamentary democracy and the system of justice in our province, and then hiding from the people of Alberta. It's just not acceptable.
Pretty straight to the point there. Hard to get confused. And she's not wrong. We have a clown car government that is doing a god-awful job of using words. And it's not like the problem of using words is a new one for them. We've seen Danielle Smith having problem using words since she was first elected. Even before that, we can look at the leadership race and go, oh, there's volumes to be written about the dumb things that Danielle Smith has spoken imprecisely on. But here's the fundamental problem with all of that. Speaking imprecisely is not an excuse that we should be hearing repeatedly from the Premier of Alberta. It's a very, very dangerous tone, because the two options are either Danielle Smith doesn't care about these rules. She's aware of them. She just doesn't care about them, and she's choosing to run all over them, or she's just that incompetent. And she's surrounded by so much incompetence that nobody is able to speak to her in a way that she can hear about how badly she's doing things. It's been pointed out that Danielle Smith never ever should have taken that call with Artur Pawlowski, even if it did come through Dr. Modry as cover for the phone logs. It never should have happened. There's real questions to be asked about whether or not Danielle Smith should even be taking calls from Dr. Modry. But he's now running for the UCP, so allegedly he's thinking about it. So maybe. She was on that call alone, which should have never, ever happened, especially given her pattern of behavior of speaking off the cuff and saying dumb things that are demonstrably false, which she knows better, by the way, because she's on record in several other places saying, well, I thought that I could do amnesty and then I couldn't. And then in other places, she's saying, everybody knows you can't do amnesty. That's an American thing. She changes her wording and her message with every single audience that she speaks to. And what she doesn't seem to have any understanding of is that that's wildly dangerous. Or she does. And that's even more dangerous. And the leader of the opposition made no mistake of clarifying that.
What kind of system, you're a political scientist, what kind of system do we have here where if the government can interfere in criminal cases, call whoever they want, if they deem it to be in the greater good as they define it, what type of political system are we operating under here?
Well, I mean, it's on the, we're on the verge of a Tim Pot dictatorship, but let's be clear, only if they don't step up and recognize the significance of the mistakes that they have made, and they must do that. But it is, I mean, you start ripping apart the fundamental tenets of democracy, you move into dictatorship. It's that simple. It's a dictatorship on the basis of, as Mr. Madhu suggested, the discretion of the Premier. That's not how democracy works. There are always constitutional limits on the rule of the majority within the democracy. Those limits are provided by the judicial system and by the Constitution as a whole. That's the way our system works in Canada. Otherwise, you would have the majority overruling the fundamental rights of the minority all the time. And so that's how a democracy works in not only Commonwealth countries, but Western democracies around the world. And so Danielle Smith is either, incredibly uninformed about her roles and responsibilities, or she is intentionally lying to the people of Alberta about what it is she thinks she's able to do.
Now, Ms. Notley was a little bit more generous, I think, than perhaps the situation warranted. Because here's the problem with, well, she's misinformed. It's very generous, olive branch to extend to the current Premier of Alberta. Maybe she just doesn't know these things. But the problem is, it's demonstrated that she does. It's demonstrated that there are people around her who can and should be providing her correction. What we're seeing unfold in the province of Alberta right now is nothing less than a person who wants what they want when they want it, period. And she's being emboldened by a variety of people who also want what they want when they want it. And this is profoundly dangerous for us as a society, because at the end of the day, if we don't recognize that some of the things that we do in society, we do And we don't want to, but we do so that we can have a society. If we don't recognize that, we're in a lot of trouble. Let's be really clear here. There have always been pockets of people who have bigoted views, racist views, prejudiced views, superior views. They have always existed. They always will. These groups don't care who they hurt as long as they get what they want. And historically, we've done an improving job of keeping those things in check. But it doesn't happen because nobody does anything. I was watching a clip where Jon Stewart was talking just a little while ago, and he was talking about how there's this saying that the moral arc of history bends towards justice. But it only does that because there are people pushing every day. And when one of them drops off, somebody else comes and pushes every day. But the particularly relevant part to what Mr. Stewart said about the opposing side is where Alberta needs to be paying attention. Because there are other people who are trying to bend it away from the principles of justice, away from the principles of democracy and of fairness. That's just the reality. And right now, we have a provincial government that is allowing them to do so largely unchecked. Danielle Smith has not condemned Artur Pawlowski. Danielle Smith has not condemned Tory Tanner. She hasn't condemned any of these people or the bigoted views that they continue to bring to the forefront. And that's why it gets so very important for the rest of us to do it. That's pretty much all of our planned content for the evening. I've run my way through the entire script. As always, I want to open it up to the floor, the Twitter Spaces, if you will. If there's anybody who is on Twitter Spaces right now who has some thoughts, if you want to tell me how I got something wrong, by all means, hop on the Twitter Spaces right now, and you can tell me exactly how I got it wrong. I'm going to vamp for a minute or two while we wait to see if anybody raises their hand. Otherwise, we'll probably be calling it a night right here. So I'll do the obligatory Patreon plug right now. As always, it's so hard to do it when in the middle of the show when I'm trying to buy time in case anybody does want to raise their hand on Twitter Spaces. But here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, we're able to do the kind of content that we do because of two things. Now, historically, I say the support of our Patreon supporters, and that's absolutely right. But there's something that I want to add on to that, and I'm going to try to add on to it on a weekly basis. It's the support of everybody who listens to the show, everybody who engages with the show, everybody who engages with us on social media, because there is so much stuff that goes on. And if we didn't have the most amazing audience in the history of everything, sending us multiple DMs a day, sometimes an hour, there's lots of stuff that we wouldn't catch because everything moves so quickly. And it is such a big fire hose of bullshit that's being sprayed across the province right now. And the explanations that we get from the people who send us these DMs is why these things are relevant. I want to say we wouldn't be able to do it in the way that we do it without those folks. So to everybody who's been sending us stuff and engaging with us, I want to say a tremendous thank you. The other way that we're able to continue producing the kind of content that we do is, yes, this is the financial plug, because of our Patreon sponsors. So if you have a little bit of disposable income, if you don't, that's totally cool. Totally get it. I know that there's a lot of people who listen to the show who are in situations where they simply don't have the financial means to support the show they wish they could. That's not a problem at all. We're never going to paywall any of our content. You're never going to get less of the breakdown because you're not a Patreon supporter. This is the worst sales pitch in the history of everything. But if you want to help us to continue produce the kind of content that we do, you can do that by signing up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. $5 a month get you the warm fuzzy feeling of knowing that you're helping us to do it. If you're really feeling bold, you can tweet out that you just became a Breakdown supporter. I'm told that there's all kinds of politicos that pisses off to no end. But the other little perk that you get is you get early access to our upcoming interview episodes. We're going to be doing more and more and more of those. And in fact, it's probably going to be we do a live show, then we do an interview episode. We do a live show, then we do an interview episode because I really enjoy the interviews. So we're going to be doing more of the interview episodes. We've got one coming up this week. We're going to be dropping it on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock for the general public. But of course, our Patreon sponsors will have early access tomorrow. And that's going to be a conversation. I sort of prefaced this a little while ago where I said, we have historically done some more, let's raise some awareness issues. And we have an amazing conversation coming up with Julian Fletcher, who's the program coordinator from the Tourette and OCD Alberta Network, about where we're going to dispel a bunch of myths. And there's plenty, especially about Tourette's. We're going to dispel a bunch of myths that exist around Tourette's. And he's actually going to talk about some of the resources that he's offering, particularly to educators, to teachers, to help kids who are dealing with Tourette's and OCD, because they do tend to go a little bit hand in hand, apparently. It's a fascinating conversation. I was really grateful that he was willing to have it with us. So we're going to drop that on Wednesday, but again, tomorrow for our Patreon supporters. And it looks like, if there's one person that I was hoping would raise their hand, and I'm sure they're going to have some things that will transiently raise my blood pressure, as he always does. Ziad, what's going on tonight?
Oh, Nate, if your blood pressure is going high, maybe we can find some medication for you from Turkey or something like that.
Is that an option? I hear you have to buy bulk, though.
Yeah, well, although you get a super deal, though, if you do.
Is it, though?
I was just looking at a quote on this 5 million bottle purchase, and one of the latest excuses, I think this is from Alana Smith's article, is that buying 5 million bottles, or 14 years of national demand, gave us the best price. And, it's only twice the wholesale price and more than the retail price. So, I haven't added them to my thread yet, but there are some interesting revisions of the bought 5 million bottles sight unseen. The other one was, we bought 5 million bottles in order to get ahead of the queue of all the other countries that wanted this. But on the 20th of March at that London Drugs, Health Minister Copping admitted there was no other places to which this product was being exported. So what kind of a competition is it? You're buying 5 million bottles to get ahead of all the other countries clamoring at it, but there's no other countries that even want this stuff. So
custom work is always more expensive, though.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nate.
Custom work is always more expensive, though, when you're paying a company that doesn't typically make that product in that formulation to generate all of that product for no reason other than Danielle Smith wants it. You're basically getting a from scratch. It's like,
I still
homemade apple pie always costs more than the store bought.
I still don't understand. I'm expecting there'll be an investigation, if not from a change in government, from the things that I've been pushing. But I still do not understand how you buy $70 million worth of product and then tinkle away another $10 million on top of that, sight unseen. How you can sign up to buy 5 million bottles of something that you haven't even looked at or held in your hand. You're just ordering this stuff off the internet.
I think at the end of the day, the more, I know that there's probably some grift involved. I'm sure somebody's getting paid because none of it makes any sense. But at the end of the day, I think that a big part of it is we have a premier who thinks that she's able to find all of the clever solutions that nobody else can find. We got to remember, Danielle Smith is the same leadership contestant who was like, what we could do, though, to get around these federal travel restrictions, we could just deputize everybody as being ambassadors. That might work. And everybody who knows anything about the diplomatic corps immediately went, no, it won't, because that's not how any of this works. But she fancies herself to be this great creative problem solver. And I think that, the more that I ruminate on this whole dumpster fire, um, the more I land on, I think this was Danielle Smith's big creative solution to the problem because when you say it out loud, it totally sounds like a Danielle Smith train of thought. Okay, so we're out of Tylenol. So what could we do to get some Tylenol? Well, maybe we could talk to some people who like make the ingredients for Tylenol. And you know what? If they can make the ingredients for Tylenol, maybe if we talk to them, maybe if we gave them a little bit of extra money, maybe we could get them to actually make all the Tylenol and ship it here. We could totally solve the problem that way. Tell me that doesn't sound like a Danielle Smith thing that she'd say on her radio show.
So, she's the premier. I can understand this is the motivation of the senior leader. And, she has motivation like her predecessor to make Ottawa look bad. So I can understand wanting to buy 5 million bottles of acetaminophen and being able to, save the country. Going, we were able to find this stuff in Turkey that Health Canada and the Canadian industry was not able to find, and we solved a problem. But on the execution, the part where the health minister and the officials in the health ministry are supposed to come through, they failed. So they didn't get the child resistant caps. They didn't get the labeling right. They didn't get the concentration right. They didn't get the dosing device right. Pharmacists all over Alberta on a routine basis were compounding acetaminophen to the right concentration of 160 milligrams of acetaminophen per 5 milliliters of fluid. And this stuff from Atabey is 120. Why couldn't they order 160? That would have solved the concentration problem.
Math is
The
hard.
other thing is, and the other thing is the dosing device. Like, how hard is it to get an oral syringe? That's what you need in Canada. Why didn't making a custom order for 5 million bottles, why not get the manufacturer to put the oral syringe in? It's a custom manufacturing run. But they didn't do that, and now we have an unsellable product. I've talked to two pharmacists. I can't say one of them is from London Drugs, but they will not sell this stuff. I pushed the London Drugs pharmacist hard, saying, even if you had it and I was really pushing you, would you sell it to me? And he says, no. And I appreciate his ethics for that because they've got the legit product there, which is the right concentration and it has the right dosing device. Even if he could give me a better dosing device, the pharmacist, because there's a mandatory counseling part built into this, it's behind the counter in the dispensary, the pharmacist has to make a record saying, Ziad Fazal bought this medication on this day for this child with this healthcare number. I provided counseling that this is the way Ziad Fazal has to adjust the dosage to account for the lower concentration. And I provided an oral syringe for Ziad Fazal to do this right. And the pharmacist has to cover his tuchus on this because he's being paid to counsel me and give me a dosing device to make up for the deficiencies in the Alberta government's order of these things. And they bought 5 million of these things. So, they kill the retail product with their incompetence.
I'm reminded of an expression that I use on occasion with an organization that I sometimes do some work with. And that expression is, yes, but is there a worse way to do it? And I think, looking at this whole situation, it's hard to not have that come to mind.
So I'm going to choose my words carefully here, but the worst way to do this is because the motivation in December was really about enriching MH Care Medical. So we had this problem in October, November, December, where there was panic buying in Canada because there were shortages of acetaminophen. And there was a letter from the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto which said that parents should get a prescription for over-the-counter acetaminophen because there's a shortage. And that caused everybody to panic buy and hoard. And so even that mistake ended up getting corrected by the supply from the US and the supply from Australia with manufacturers who are truly meeting Canadian requirements, Canadian concentration, Canadian dosing device, Canadian packaging and labeling. And we made up for this run of 5 million bottles that happened in October through December of last year. By December, this was solved. So what I see happen is the Alberta government decided to make their crony MH Care Medical rich by putting 500,000 immediately within a couple of months of 5 million bottles of deliveries to put MH Care in the position of being a distributor across Canada of this panic buying, of this empty shelf situation that wasn't getting resolved fast enough from North American suppliers. And like I said, I got to choose my words carefully here, but I think an inquiry has to look for kickbacks
Have
because
you
I
seen a
just do
campaign
not
province on
see.
this yet? Like this seems to me, this is one of those things where a campaign promise from the NDP to say, you know what, if we get elected, we're gonna look at this thing, and if there's hell to pay, we're gonna make sure it gets paid. Have you seen that yet? Because I haven't seen that.
I have not. I'm a little disappointed in David Shepard, the NDP health critic. He seems a little too passive. He's a wonderful master thespian orator, but he doesn't hold the government accountable very well. I don't see him putting questions to the government that are trying to pin them down. He gives speeches. I've tried to contact him several times over the last number of years on different things related to health procurement, and he ignores it. And so I'm hoping there's a different, you can see it, for example, Raki Pancholi taking over questioning, which, you would handle.
She
You do that
crushed
way because
that.
you have a lawyer who's trained at
Yeah.
asking questions of a witness. But I'd like to see more assertiveness from the NDP on scandals within AHS. They've got some cleaning up to do.
They do. They for sure do. I just want to address two quick questions while I've got you on the line here in the comments, because they're kind of sort of related to what we're talking about. The first one is, and I want to make sure I get this right, Atabay Pharmaceutical was indeed started by Dr. Oz's mom's family. To the best of my knowledge, and this is where I'm going to lean on you here, Ziad, to correct me if I'm getting it wrong, and you know that I am. To the best of my knowledge, Dr. Oz's mom is no longer on the board of directors due to medical reasons, but the company is still, everybody talks about it like, it's Dr. Oz's mom's company. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so her name is Suna Atabay, and she married Mehmet Oz's father. So her married name is Oz, but it's the Atabay family that owns this. And I wouldn't say medical reason. I believe she's in her late 70s, and she's a millionaire, maybe billionaire. So she doesn't need to be on the board anymore. There are other members of the Atabay family that are in the management. It's not publicly listed. It's privately held, largely through the Atabay family. And the nephew of Suna Atabay is the health minister of Turkey. And Health Canada is allowing this exceptional import of these medications because our CMOH has done an attestation saying we can't get them anywhere else. And the chemical approval for this acetaminophen from Health Canada is based on the Turkish Health Ministry's testing. So the nephew of the company's founders, his ministry did the testing of this product, and that's what Health Canada is taking as acceptance for the import. So, I trust Health Canada. They've been looking at these test results, and I trust that, especially given these circumstances, they'd be paying a little bit more attention to it. Mm-hmm. The reason I call this stuff crap is because our own health minister lies about this. He's lied from the beginning that this Atabay product, the bulk acetaminophen, was already approved by Health Canada when it wasn't. And he's lied from the beginning saying there's no Canadian manufacturing when there was. The plant in Guelph was right on the homepage of Johnson & Johnson Canada. And that's not the only plant that manufactures in Canada. So I call it crap, not necessarily as a slam against Atabay or Turkish people. It's because our own government is lying to us in forcing this product on us. And in order to, in my view, enrich MH Care.
There we go. All right. Ziad, I want to thank you so much for weighing in. We got somebody else who's raised their hand. So thank you so much for your thoughts as always. I absolutely love hearing from you, man.
Although I give you stress sometimes.
But it's an informed stress, so it's okay. It's not like you're just calling me names. I want to address something that came up in the comments before I open it up to Mr. Nobody, and we've never had you on the show before, so I'm gonna just lay out some ground rules for him and everybody, or I assume him and everybody else who maybe is thinking about raising your hand. Love to have you raise your hand. To be clear, that being said, we got some basic ground rules. No hate speech. No, don't go crazy with the profanity. keep it polite. We're trying to have a conversation here. Nobody gets to shout. So that's kind of, except for me. So that's kind of the ground rules. But I just wanted to address a comment that's come up. I love the comment section tonight. Y'all are on fire. There's been a couple people who have said, this is old news. I assume that anybody who's looking at the multiple scandals that we've talked about tonight with the Smith government and the UCP and the wasting of taxpayers' dollars, I assume that if these events that are less than 6 months old are old news, you're not somebody who ever talks about the NDP's record. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility, because consistency is critically important. We have Mr. Nobody, who has been requested to be a speaker. We've got you added in. If you unmute your microphone, what do you got? What do you got to say? What's going on tonight?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you just fine.
Okay, just want to confirm because I have a Bluetooth speaker, I got other devices or whatever. I just want to make sure you're hearing me nice and clear.
Yeah.
And I'll keep the language, I'm not going to use any unparliamentary language, and I'm not here to be adversarial or difficult or anything like that. And like I said, I'm here for a conversation, right? Because I'm just a little bit perplexed here. Now, I was listening, you were playing that clip about, Miss Notley, about the dictatorship and all that other stuff concerning, political interference or potential political interference. Okay. Now, the thing is, the first thing that came to mind was that SNC Lavalin thing that happened a few years ago with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and how she didn't want to pursue it because of that same argument of political interference. Okay, so this is the thing. When is it? Like, I know the laws are different in Canada versus the U.S. and how there's certain things that the president of the U.S. can give pardons and whatnot, and governors can give stays of execution, etc. I'm aware that the laws are different in Canada versus in the U.S. But when it comes to political interference, like Jody Wilson-Raybould, to the best of my knowledge, was trying to protect the Prime Minister's office concerning about how she didn't want to pursue this deferred prosecution. Okay. Another thing, and this is also associated with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and I'm just stating facts, I'm not trying to slam her down or take her down or badmouth the lady. Okay. Another thing of concern to her about political interference, and this had to do with overturning a case, because apparently she had a case on her desk for approximately 18 months, if I have my facts correct, concerning a Glenn Assoun. I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Assoun. And he was convicted of murdering his wife, I believe, back in 1999. So sorry, I got.
Sounds like you found it, man.
Yeah, this always happens to me. Sorry about that. Okay. Naturally. Yeah, next time we'll close the window. I apologize.
It's all good.
And she had had the case on her desk for 18 months, and she purposely ignored it. Okay. And then when Jody Wilson-Raybould was ejected from her position, it was somehow okay for David Lametti, the new Justice Minister, because that was like one of his first orders of when he took over the position, is to deal with this, Glenn Assoun person. Okay. And to be fair with Jody Wilson-Raybould, another incident happened in the past under the Brian Mulroney administration with Kim Campbell, where it was the same situation about opening up a case or overturning a conviction concerning David Milgaard.
Okay, I'm gonna just quickly jump in for a quick sec there,
right?
Mr. Nobody. So there's two things that I just want to sort of course correct on a little bit here. It's very clear that you're very passionate about the SNC Lavalin situation, and that's cool. I don't have a problem with that. I'll be honest with you. This is an Alberta politics sandbox, so I can't speak with any sort of intelligence or authority on the whole uh, intricacies of SNC-Lavalin or Jody Wilson-Raybould, just because following Alberta politics is sort of the all-encompassing beast that's constantly chewing on my leg. But I just want to. Are you trying to tie this back to Danielle Smith and these scandals somehow, or are we going down a rabbit hole here? I just want to make sure I know what we're talking about.
Oh, like I know that this has to do, with federally, and the thing is that I'm not trying to tie it into Danielle Smith. Okay, my theme or my concern or what I'm confused or perplexed about is when is it construed to be political interference in our court systems, and when isn't it, acceptable behavior to intervene, for lack of a better term, where it's socially acceptable, or if it's proper.
It's
to,
not.
When it
It's
comes
not.
to
There's no excuses for it. I'm not going to mince any words here with you, man. The bottom line is, if anybody overreaches on their power, or if anybody steps outside of the confines of what their power is supposed to be, they should absolutely face the full force of the law on that. I don't care whose. This is not a partisan show. I don't care whose side, air quotes, you're on. Um, the bottom line is that if you're reaching outside of your sphere, your defined sphere of influence, if you're trying to exert power or influence in areas that it's clearly legally defined that you're not supposed to, it's not accessible. I don't care if it's a conservative. I don't care if it's a liberal. I don't care if it's an NDPer. I don't care who it is. If you are trying to subvert the principal foundations of our democracy, then you need to stop and you need to face the full force of the law. That's the bottom line. I get really squirrely when people start to bring up these sorts of arguments, because all of a sudden we're not talking about what we were talking about. Now we're talking about the other guys and how bad the other guys are. I don't want to have that conversation right now, because right now we've got a problem in the province of Alberta where the premier of Alberta allegedly and apparently has no problems whatsoever with major overreach. And if for anybody who's followed the show for any length of time, you know that we've gone after the NDP with some conviction. But Rachel Notley's not wrong in the clip that we played earlier tonight, because when you have somebody who is either through ignorance or deliberate will subverting the norms that exist that keep our society going, when you have a premier or a prime minister, I don't care, when you have somebody like that who thinks that they're entitled to call up the crown prosecutor, if you do any of those things to try to influence the outcome of a criminal trial, then you've crossed over to the boundaries of the elected official getting to decide how the judiciary acts, and it's not acceptable from anyone.
Okay. Well, no, I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to play any partisan games. I'm just trying to have some clarity in my own mind. Okay. Because I have listened to what, you have said through the show. I have listened to that, sound clip of Rachel Notley of what she was saying. Right. And I'm just trying to decipher for myself, when is it proper or acceptable versus when it's not acceptable. And I just wanted to give, these certain cases when it came to Glenna Sound and David Milgaard and happening here. Because I know that, your show is mostly within, the provincial tier of governance, and I get that. And it's I'm just mentioning other cases, and, these are applicable cases in Canada. I'm not trying to import other cases from other countries. Okay. I'm trying to keep, it's Canadian content, even though I know you're more provincial content, because like I said, I was just trying to get some better understanding to clear things up of, well, when is it acceptable or when it's not. Now I know you're saying to me that it's not acceptable, doesn't matter what tier it is, but is there legislation?
Yeah, we've got a criminal code, man. At the end of the day, we've got a criminal code that's very, very clear that says how these things work. And the bottom line is that if we have that going on, if we have those clearly defined rules, if you want to function in that role, if you want to be the Premier of Alberta, if you want to be the Justice Minister, if you want to be any of those things, then you damn well better figure out what the rules of engagement are. Because if you go into a role that has the ability to wreak significant societal and economic harm on the population, and you haven't bothered to read the job description, you've got no business being in that role. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, I was just trying to clear things up in my mind of when, and believe me, like I said, I'm not trying to be partisan. I'm not. I mean, I'm mentioning certain names, and certain names are associated with certain partisan groups, but I'm just giving you, these are real case examples. It's not fiction. I'm not pulling anything out of.
At the end of the day, though, man,
my
abuse of power is abuse of
right?
power, and if I don't ever want to get to a place where I'm willing to overlook abuses of power because it's cool they're on my team. I can trust them with unilateral power. Power corrupts, absolutely. The whole reason why our system is designed the way that it is so that we have checks and balances in place. And I'm not, if I'm sounding passionate, it's not because I'm trying to dump on you, man. It's simply because it is beyond my understanding how we can find ourselves in a position where a current Premier of Alberta, who has the full force and resources of the government of Alberta, including all of the bureaucracy, including her right-hand man who's a lawyer, if she can't find her way out of the wet paper bag that is, here's what you're supposed to do, here's what you're not supposed to do, I don't even know how we got here.
Yeah. Well, like I said, my theme is I'm trying to figure out what is, acceptable practices within the law, and what is construed as overreach or what's improper, and that's what I'm just trying to figure out in my mind, right?
Yeah, no, I would encourage you to reference the legislation. Like, honestly, we have laws that clearly define this.
Yeah.
So I take a look at those things because it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. No, sorry, I'm not trying to overspeak here. It's just no social cues when you kind of do this kind of thing. It's like a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
But yeah, that's the thing that I want to explore or check out the applicable legislation when it comes to certain I wouldn't say irregularities, but unique cases like we've mentioned, right? And believe me, like I said, I'm not trying to be difficult or adversarial. I'm going to
ask you to make it quick, just because we do have a bit of a queue of people who want to speak. So if you can fire through it, I'd appreciate it, man.
Okay. Anyways, no. I'll just leave it at that, because if there's other people who want to have an opportunity to ask a question or to express themselves, I don't want to dominate the conversation any further. Okay. And I'll leave it at that. And thank you for taking my not my call, but giving me the opportunity.
I'm still trying to figure out what to call it too, man. So no, thanks for speaking. And again, I just want to be really clear. I wasn't trying to dunk on you or nothing like that. And I don't have a problem when the average Albertan doesn't have a full and complete nuanced grasp of what are the laws, what are the legislation. I don't have an issue with that. What I take issue with is when there are people who are claiming to be qualified to fill those roles who fail to do so. That's where I get frustrated. But I'm going to open it up now to the politics of I believe it's equity and disability. I could be getting it wrong.
Disability and equity.
Oh, I was so close.
So close.
What's going on today?
Well, I just wanted to answer to some of that, because I admit, because it was so long ago, it's a bit vague in my mind, but I do remember those cases. I was around. And one of the things that I've noticed is, in this particular case with Danielle Smith in Alberta, is that what we have here and what we didn't have then is she's actually recorded in interviews as well as the secret recording where she is outright saying that she was putting pressure on prosecutors. And
There's a bit of a
and
difference
that to
there.
me is even more problematic than what happened in those other cases, is because we've got clear evidence of her saying that she was doing so, and then when she gets caught she tries to backtrack, but the point is that she keeps saying it. And so that's where the questions, I think, really come in. Now, we really don't know, but I tend to take people, the first thing that they say is usually the thing that was the most honest most of the time. And when they have to backtrack only when they get caught, that's probably a clear indication that they're just like, oh, I got caught, maybe I should change what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so that's my whole thing. And I totally loved the skip the dishes Kate Perry reference you made. They want when they want what they wanted. I can't sing that song anyway.
Neither can I.
But a little extra cheese on it. Nobody got it in the YouTube chat. But anyway, that's all I had to say today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we got Ziad, who is going to come back with some thoughts. Ziad, go ahead and unmute yourself. Share. You've already done the Tylenol thing. Are we gonna? What are you gonna hit me with next?
I've got some suggestions for Mr. Nobody. Two Twitter accounts to follow. One is Sandy Grassino, who's a former federal Crown prosecutor. So she comments really well on cases like this and contrasting the Jody Wilson-Raybould case from the current case. Dwayne Bratt is another one who's very good at this. So this will provide some clarity and some understanding of the differences between those. For example, the SNC Lavalin and Jody Wilson-Raybould situation and the current Danielle Smith situation. The other point I'd like to make is that the Danielle Smith situation is very new. It really only picked up in January when CBC reported that there were emails going to Crown Prosecution Service from Danielle Smith's office putting pressure about these cases. And then, subsequently we've had a form of email investigation. And then we've had the recording get released.
Right there.
And then we've had Casey Madhu put his foot in his mouth, saying that there were more people than just the minister and the deputy attorney general who Smith's office was speaking with. There were other officials within the justice ministry. So it's very new. It's only 3 months old that the Smith interference and the term you were looking for, maybe, Mr. Nobody, is prosecutorial independence and prosecutorial interference. So it's very new here, whereas we had several years of history that had all occurred with the Jody Wilson-Raybould situation. Right, like it was several months without pressure she was being placed under. She was secretly making phone calls. Then there was a parliamentary investigation. The chief privy council officer testified. Recordings came out. That situation took a year and a half, 2 years to unwind. We're only 3 months into this provincial situation, but there's more to come. Thanks.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. And just to clarify, my enthusiasm for that particular segment of the conversation, here's where it boils down to me. To throw a very clumsy metaphor, if my dog, or if a dog craps on the floor and it's actively crapping on the floor, then the correct reaction to me is to say, bad dog, don't crap on the floor, and to try to stop the dog from crapping on the floor more. I don't understand why it is when there's a dog crapping on the floor actively, anybody would have the reaction of, well, yes, but remember 4 years ago, that other time that the dog crapped on the floor. No, he's crapping on the floor now. We can get the dog we can minimize the crap. We can do that because it's happening real time. Let's do that. If you want to talk about the old crap, we can talk about the old crap later. But right now, the dog's actively crapping on the floor. Let's not have that happen. That's my thoughts. All right. I want to say again, huge thank you to everybody in the chat tonight. I'm actually gonna go back and read all of this because I haven't been able to keep up. You guys have been on fire tonight. So I want to thank everybody who has been engaging in the show, whether you decided to speak on the Twitter Spaces tonight, whether you decided to write a small novel in the chats. Super awesome. Thank you so much. If you are a Patreon sponsor tomorrow night, look for the conversation about Tourette's and OCD. If you're not, it'll be live on Wednesday, and then we'll be back with another live episode on Sunday next week. Until then, self-care is important. Take care of yourselves. And I said it last week. I'm going to say it again just because we are heading into an election. The call to action for the end of this show is the folks who are causing the problems have no hesitation whatsoever about talking to people and trying to convince them that their way is the right way. And the only way that we're going to get ahead of that, because it has been normalized by our premier, is by having conversations ourselves. So find a new person this week that you haven't talked to and say, hey, did you know about this thing? Have you heard anything about this thing? Try to get that conversation started, because the reality is most people don't know what's going on. And that's how all of the very bad people are able to do the very bad things. So that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.
Thank you.